At 9:40 a.m., just 500 feet above the restless surface of the Pacific Ocean, the pilot of a C-17 Globemaster III locked his eyes on a target that seemed absurdly small against the immensity below him. A submarine only 560 feet long, barely a sliver of steel lost in an ocean that stretched wider than continents, a line no thicker than a pencil drawn across a canvas the size of Russia. Inside the cockpit, the weight of precision pressed harder than the four Pratt & Whitney engines, pushing 412,000 pounds of airborne steel through buffeting winds. This was a one-shot test, a moment where a single 50-pound package had to be delivered onto a moving target while flying an aircraft designed to haul tanks, not play darts with submarines. If he dropped early or late, the package would miss by dozens of meters, and 3 painstaking years of planning would collapse instantly in a failure. If he hit too squarely, the risk was even greater. He'd have to explain to Congress how the United States Air Force accidentally struck a $2.1 billion nuclear asset with a steel box. Zero tolerance for error. A full 30 seconds to execution. This crisis had been set in motion hours earlier, back at 5:30 a.m. on October 22, 2020, when the Globemaster thundered into the air out of Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii. The mission sounded deceptively simple. Fly nearly 800 miles northwest. Rendezvous with the ballistic missile submarine USS Henry M. Drop off a supply package, and return. But unlike routine resupply drops over desert forward operating bases or NATO airstrips in Europe, this wasn't standard cargo duty. This was the very first attempt at resupplying a submarine directly by air, something that had lived on briefing slides and PowerPoint decks for years, but never been tested in the field. The ocean doesn't forgive experiments. It swallows mistakes. The Henry M. Jackson, one of the most secretive and heavily armed vessels in the U.S. Navy, had been submerged for 6 hours, keeping strict radio silence, as Pacific currents carried her unpredictably away from her last known position. Locating her now was like trying to detect a black hole drifting invisibly across a sea the size of Asia. Even with the C-17s and /APS-133 maritime surveillance radar sweeping a radius of 250 nautical miles, the radar screens filled with clutter, wave tops, floating debris, reflections from schools of fish, a digital storm of false positives. The radar operators scanned, rescanned, and leaned on years of training to pick out subtle rhythms that might betray the steady displacement of a steel hull hiding beneath the swells. Meanwhile, over the endless blue, navigation lost every luxury of landlocked flying. No cities, no ridge lines, no comforting visual cues, just the same shade of Pacific horizon repeated in every direction, an infinity that disoriented the senses. GPS might pin their own aircraft's location to within 30 feet, but couldn't tell them where the submarine had drifted. By midnight, the Henry M. Jackson had last been plotted within a box of water 50 square miles wide, and 6 hours of silent drift meant she could have ended up anywhere inside it. At 7:30 a.m., a burst of life came through, a radio squawk lasting just 1.3 seconds, a coded transmission with fresh coordinates. The submarine had drifted 4.2 nautical miles northeast, far enough to render the original flight path useless, but not unusual for a vessel trimming its ballast tanks and current. Great for stealth, terrible for rendezvous. Course recalculations flew between navigator, pilot, and radar operator. By 9:15 a.m., the first promising blip resolved itself against the static, faint, intermittent, nearly lost in the sea clutter, but repeating just consistently enough to suggest something solid. A submarine surfacing doesn't announce itself. Waves wash over its hull, breaking radar contact, before it reappears for another pulse. This dance was enough to home in. The C-17 banked toward the contact. Down in the cavernous cargo bay, strapped with nothing more elaborate than nylon tie-downs, sat the 50-pound test package, a waterproof box wrapped like a vacationer's suitcase in foam flotation gear and a bright collar. No GPS tracker, no beacon, no electronics at all. By design, the system was primitive. Like complex machines fail at sea, foam floats. If it worked, submarines could be resupplied with critical parts, medicines, or even small arms while remaining undetected in patrol areas for months longer than ever before. At 9:25 a.m., the Globemaster began its ungainly descent to 500 feet. For an aircraft designed to operate at high altitude with stability, dropping into ground effect over open water transformed it into something monstrous and unstable. Aerodynamic cushions bounced it unpredictably, making precise control nearly impossible. The pilots wrestled the controls like reins on a stubborn animal. The Henry M. Jackson emerged below, a leviathan of black steel, her hull breaking the waves, moving at a steady 6 knots. The width of a two-lane road, that was all the target zone offered. Both aircraft and submarine fought their own battles, ballast and trim keeping the submarine's massive frame stable on the surface, while the C-17 brawled with air currents to hold hold altitude, speed, and heading. And into this chaos, a rigid-hull inflatable boat with 4 sailors launched from the sub, bouncing on waves that wanted to throw them aside. Their job, recover the package once it hit water. Between 3 platforms, voice coordination became frantic. The submarine transmitting course every 30 seconds, the rib reporting distance and angle through jolting swells, the aircraft struggling to hold a magic speed of 120 knots. Too fast, and the package would overshoot by hundreds of meters. Too slow, and the Globemaster systems would shriek of impending stall, an unthinkable disaster for a jet this size. There was no margin. The crew practiced one pass, a dry run to sync timing. From the loadmaster's small window, the submarine slid past, close enough to see sailors on deck. It was a reminder that any mistake here didn't just mean embarrassment. It meant possibly striking the Navy's most survivable nuclear asset. At 9:35 a.m., the final approach began. The submarine held steady on heading 285 degrees, 6 knots. The rib floated 200 meters off her starboard beam, ready to pounce. The loadmaster clipped into his harness, eyes fixed through the window at the moving patch of ocean, running the physics in his head. The package would fall 500 feet, about 5.57 seconds of descent. In that time, the submarine would advance 15 meters. The wind would drift it eastward by about 20 meters. Forward throw from the C-17's momentum added another 344 meters. He'd dropped countless loads before, but never one where the difference between success and failure was measured in meters, not football fields. The pilot fought to keep airspeed at 120 knots, not 119, not 121, while altitude held at 500 feet, not a foot higher or lower. Every second, the flight engineer called deviations. The pilot corrected, like threading a needle while wearing boxing gloves. The loadmaster counted down 3, 2, 1, and yanked the release. Out tumbled the package, 50 pounds of human hope and engineering theory, spinning slightly as gravity wrestled it down through humid air. 5 seconds later, a splash. Eyes strained. It landed about 150 meters ahead and 1,000 meters off to starboard. Far from perfect, but well within reach. The flotation collar burst outward, popping the package to the surface where it bobbed defiantly. The ribs outboard roared, spray kicking high as sailors surged toward it, wrestled it aboard, and secured it. Relief poured through every headset. The test worked. Not flawlessly, but it worked. 3 years of planning had not ended with a smashed submarine or lost cargo. What it meant went beyond one box. With this proof of concept, submarines could be resupplied covertly anywhere on Earth without breaking patrol patterns, without surfacing near ports, without betraying their stealth. The nuclear deterrent just became harder to track, harder to exhaust, harder to outlast. A submarine force that could stay on station indefinitely, topped up from the sky, meant the most survivable leg of America's nuclear triad was now even more untouchable. The Globemaster banked away, rising back into safety altitude, its crew exhausted but buzzing from the adrenaline. The Henry M. Jackson slipped back beneath the Pacific, as though nothing had happened. But everyone who'd been present knew history had just been quietly written in a patch of empty ocean. And from here, the story didn't end. It only began. Because in the aftermath of that test, the Pentagon saw more than just a supply drop. They saw a doctrine shift. They saw a future where submarines no longer needed to break stealth for months at a time. Imagine ballistic missile submarines, America's crown jewel deterrent, able to receive critical replacement parts mid-patrol in the middle of the South China Sea, or medicines for a sick sailor in the Arctic Circle, or encrypted equipment flown out covertly into the Atlantic. It meant fewer force port calls, less predictable patterns, more survivability in the face of rival surveillance. It meant an adversary could no longer wait out a submarine, guessing when it had to return to base for logistics. Now, that window never opened. For the Air Force, it proved the C-17 could perform roles even its designers never dreamed of. Built to move tanks, it had just demonstrated finesse at the scale of meters instead of miles. And while this test used a 50-pound box, planners immediately thought larger. Could heavier payloads be dropped? Could unmanned aerial vehicles handle precision delivery, making the process less dangerous for pilots? Could satellite cueing make location more exact, cutting hours from the search? Engineers began sketching recovery devices, better flotation rigs, even precision-guided drop canisters that would steer themselves to target in final seconds. Navy strategists realized the implications for Allied operations, resupplying submarines of partner nations, projecting presence farther from U.S. shores. Even non-military uses crept in. Imagine disaster relief where submarines could bring aid unseen into crisis zones, resupplied covertly, without surface exposure. Every angle suggested the same conclusion. What happened at 9:40 a.m. that morning was more than a stunt. It was a capability. And capabilities change doctrine. The Henry M. Jackson returned to patrol, her contribution to the test whispered in classified circles but not publicized. The C-17 returned to Hawaii, its crew filing reports that would circulate in Pentagon hallways for years. On paper, it was just a 50-pound box retrieved in the Pacific. In reality, it marked the day submarines became even more elusive, and America's silent service gained yet another edge in the endless chess match beneath the seas. And perhaps that is the lasting truth. The world never noticed. No headlines screamed. No nations reacted. Yet out there in an empty patch of ocean, beneath cloud and wind, one aircraft and one submarine quietly demonstrated that the boundaries of military logistics are only as fixed as imagination allows. The clock read 9:45 a.m. when the loadmaster leaned back from a station, adrenaline still surging, knowing he had just taken part in something that might redefine how the Navy fights wars unseen. That concludes today's report. For more real military operations, click the video on your screen and continue watching.